Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to What? Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists, they did. They absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host, and delighted that you are with me here today. And we have a lot to talk about in respect to what? Liberty lost. Liberty lost. We're seeing again, and I'm not going to belabor it because, truthfully, you can go to every other pundit out there. You could go to a lot of different websites. In Ohio, I think it's prudent to go to Free Ohio Now, and there you can see a lot of what's going on in this still the debacle of the enemy, which they are. The Democrats are nothing else but the enemy, as I showed you in the last couple of programs, where they have taken and colluded, and more so, they have married themselves to the evil of the Communist Party USA, globalist, socialist, all of that. We're seeing that being just expressed right off the bat with what Mr. Biden is attempting to do in a transitory format, and then the continuation of the press, the general press, the general media, and academia making every effort and attempt to put in place policies that will continue to destroy our morality, national virtue, and definitely our liberties, that being our religious liberty, first and foremost, our, let's just say the whole Bill of Rights. We can hear and see, and you can see it all over, where there's suppression in regards to all of the different media outlets, being the social media, the different companies that host all of that, the YouTubes, Google, Schmoogle, Doogle, and everything else that we've talked about before. Then on the side of business, the side of economic liberty, everything is being consolidated to the likes of Walmart and Amazon and all of these major online entities. That's the only place that you can really do business because of the Chi-Com flu. And we're seeing governor after governor, the governor in Ohio making a case that we have excessive numbers, and I'm not even going to get into all of them. Kath was relaying some of that to me before we started working on the program. But, we're looking at cases and cases and cases, and so what? You know what? So what? They're still less than what the normalized flu would be. And do people get sick? Yeah. And we know people that are in their 70s, because we know a lot more people in their 70s than we do that are not. And they have contacted, gotten, come down with the Chi-Com flu. And to date, some were just sent home and said, go take vitamins, go take care of yourself. Others were hospitalized, and they were given the same treatment that President Trump received, and they're doing great. But because one person in particular is in New York, now he's got to stay in the hospital, interestingly. And what does that mean for cost? A bed being taken up, blah, blah, blah. I mean, the whole ramification of this thing is interesting. And then a friend of mine who has a family in China, they're saying, we're fools. In China, they're not making them sequester. They're not making them wear masks. They're not locking them down. They have more liberty in communist China than we have in the United States, and in the various states like Ohio that are being attacked from within. Well, we're going to talk about an interesting anti-federalist. You know, I've told you that there are more anti-federalist papers than there are federalist papers. More people know about the so-called federalist papers, but today I am going to introduce to you an anti-federalist who was at the convention and saw that this Constitution could be so problematic to the extent that it would, guess what, do what it's doing today, allowing for designing men and women, whether they were communist, because the communists weren't around then, but they were people of, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. But in essence, the components of evil, as I've talked about a number of occasions, has not changed, because from the fall of Adam to the present, man will take advantage of another man unless he is living within the liberty of Jesus Christ and understanding what it means to govern with a true sovereign in place. So I don't know that I'm going to touch on any of that. But the bottom line, what it comes down to, is that we have liberty lost. We have liberty lost. And that liberty, according to this particular founder, this anti-federalist, was lost right there in 1787-88. Who's the person that I'm talking about? We're going to spend some time on. This person is called a neglected patriot. We think about Sam Adams as that patriot that got forgotten and kind of put off to the side. But here's one that was really forgotten. And again, you're going to see all of the links and everything that are in the resources for this program are at where? Yeah, right up here over my shoulder, SamuelAdamsReturns.net. Look it out for today's program, and those that got the newsletter, check it out. Please encourage people to sign up for the newsletter. We are going to be starting to do more efforts. We're going to take and finish up definitely now. I have more time. We're not jamming as hard as we had to over the last couple of weeks. So I'll have more time to finish the chaplains and clergy of the Revolution. We'll get that out, and we'll let you know about as these things roll out. They'll be on YouTube, and they'll be posted at SamuelAdamsReturns.net. So, sign up. That way you can either download the podcast, or you can watch my smiling face. There it is, smiling face. On YouTube. And Kat's just giving me a grin. She's going, oh, there he is. There he goes again. Anyway. So let's see. A neglected patriot, John Francis Mercer of Stafford County in Maryland. Now, John Francis Mercer was originally from Virginia, and he came from an aristocratic family, believe it or not. And very interestingly, his father actually came from Dublin, and he was a successful lawyer. So I got to give you this background, because this guy was no, sludge, okay? He was someone that ultimately had an aristocratic background, and that he could have easily been a Federalist. But because of everything that he learned, everything he went through, everything he observed in life and then in the Revolution, he sat back when he was at the convention and he goes, no, this isn't right. This is not right. It's going to leave too many doors open for various people that we'll talk about throughout these next couple of segments to actually cause problems to the extent that evil can step in. And because people have that propensity of selfishness, greed, and everything else, that we would see the demise of our liberties. And he talked about that right away. Anyway, real quick, in the last 5 minutes here, is that John Mercer of Marlboro, there in Virginia, he had 4 sons actually, and he served in particular during the French and Indian War. Um, let's see, that was the eldest son, George Mercer. He was George Washington's aide-de-camp. He was wounded there at the Battle of Fort Necessity, and he became a brother of the Fredericksburg Lodge, so he became a Mason in Virginia. And in 1763, he became a London agent of the Ohio Company. And his appointment as a stamp collector for Virginia in 1765 was so disastrous that he ended up moving back to England, and he lived there his whole life. The second son was John Fenton Mercer. He was also a captain in the Virginia Regiment, and he was killed and scalped by Indians near Fort Edwards in April of 1756. The third son, Judge James Mercer, like his brother, was an officer in the Virginia Regiment, and at one point commanded at Fort Loudon, which is in modern Winchester, Virginia. And he was very successful, and he was the one who got his father's estate, and he lived there during the Revolutionary War. He was involved in the politics of Virginia, so on and so forth. Now, we're going to jump all the way down to, here we go, to John Mercer's fourth son, John Francis. He had no trouble becoming a commissioned officer. He was educated by private tutors. He lost his father when he was 9. And then when the revolution erupted, he was at the College of William and Mary and a good friend of James Monroe. Early in 76, he wrangled a military appointment with the newly organized 3rd Virginia Regiment, and he was an officer cadet, then as a first lieutenant. In William Washington's company, he was commissioned in 76. At the age of 16, he became an officer, and he fought in a number of different battles. He was there at the Battle of Harlem Heights in 76. He was engaged and wounded in Brandywine, and then he performed his duties well enough to become to the rank of captain, and he endured the winter at Valley Forge. We're going to have to continue on about him in the second segment, but when he left the 3rd Virginia Regiment, he served as aide-de-camp to General Charles Lee. There was a controversy about Lee, and Major Mercer took and left his command, and he stayed loyal to General Lee to the extent that General Lee actually left something in his will for him. And we're going to come back and talk about that. But what's important to understand as we go through this character and this character background is that his background allowed him to have a broad perspective of what it was like in Virginia, what it was like actually. He was under at William and Mary. He was being taught by Thomas Jefferson for a short period of time. And he was James Monroe, who became a president of the United States. They were good friends. And we'll see here as we talk about this and more, is that he became an anti-federalist as he was sitting and listening to what Madison and the others were proposing that would subsume the states and the individual liberties of the people. We'll get into this because it's important, is that our liberties, our states have been subsumed by federal government by the way that they own the states and the governors, if you will, because of all the money. COVID's an example, and so many other ways that federal monies come in and have those hooks and ties and requirements of actions and application. Sam Adams saw that. The Anti-federalist, this guy saw that. And we're going to see more as we get back into the next two segments when Sam Adams returns with those Anti-federalists, because they got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Whom? Or is it Who? No, that's an owl that goes who. But we're coming back right here at Samuel Adams Returns, those Anti-federalists. They did get it right. This is Tom Navolis, your host. And as I always do, and we're going to do a short one today, hey, get on there, folks. Go find that donate button at where? Liberty Works Radio Network, or LWRN.net. Please see all the other hosts and hostesses. This is now, and even more so, finding that place where you are going to get the information, the education, and ideas how to fight for your liberty. It's going to be important. As we talk about this forgotten patriot, it's going to be important to understand that people have the grit, that as we get back into promoting the chaplains and clergy of the revolution, that the pastors have to have the grit. There's so much there. There's so much out there. And it's that whole idea, what's courage? Well, we don't teach that anymore. We teach tolerance and all sorts of other wackadoodle stuff. And trust me, it's a lot of wackadoodle stuff that's out there. And I just encourage you not just to get educated, but get active, because you're going to need to be active. Otherwise, somebody's going to come knocking at your door, whether it's Antifa, BLM, it all depends where you live, or it'll be, a Biden-Harris squad of whatever. But you want your liberty, and your liberty stolen. As I opened the last segment, your liberty's stolen. What are you going to do about getting your liberty? And as this patriot says, John Francis Mercer says, liberty was lost in 1788 when this Constitution moved forward. I've said that a lot, even with the Bill of Rights. And a lot of it is because the churches, the pulpits, have not produced the moral and virtuous people that are required to keep this thing in check. All right, let's pick back up from the first segment, and where I left off with was that Major Mercer resigned his commission in 1779 after the controversy at the Battle of Monmouth, where General Charles Lee was basically fired, and Major Mercer resigned. He said, enough of that. I think he thought Lee was improperly fired, that whole controversy was goofy, as we've seen in so many different ways. So this is interesting, is that General Lee takes and in his will, he gives this to Mercer. To my friend, John Francis Mercer of Marlborough in Virginia, I give and bequeath the choice of 2 broodmares of all my swords and pistols, and 10 guineas to buy a ring. I would give him more, but as he has a good estate and a better genius, he has sufficient if he knows how to make good use of them. End quote. So that was pretty interesting. So yeah, I'm going to give you these things, and some of them are more memorabilia than they are anything else. And 2 good horses, if you breed them properly, they're going to produce well for you. But what he really claimed was, here we have is that Mr. Mercer has good sense. He has better genius. He has the capacity to think. And if he knows what he's doing with everything that he has, with the wealth that he has, that he'll make good use of it. So let's continue. John Francis Mercer studied law under Thomas Jefferson, but did not for long because of the Revolutionary War. And in that portion of the ending portions of the war, this guy had enough money that what he did, he raised and equipped his own cavalry troop. He raised his own cavalry. Isn't that amazing? He had enough money to do that. And he joined General Robert Lawson's brigade, and he served at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse in March 1781, and until the brigade was disbanded. And then he attached his command to the forces of the Marquis de Lafayette. He was a lieutenant colonel. He fought his last battle at Green Spring and at Gloucester Point in late 1781, and he was a witness to the British surrender at Yorktown. This guy's got some credentials, folks. I mean, he's got some credentials. His post-war career, he was very distinguished. From 1782 to 85, he was a delegate from Virginia to the Continental Congress, so he served in Congress. He knew what was going on under the Articles of Confederation. He worked through all of that. I mean, that's pretty impressive because these guys got elected every year. Okay, it wasn't every 2 years, because that's why you see his time period that he served, 82 to 85, 3 years. He was a delegate. He went there. He married into a very wealthy family in Maryland, and he moved to his wife's plantation in Cedar Park. And when he got up there, he did join the Freemasons, and he became a leader in Maryland politics. And so he was the delegate to the Constitutional Convention in 87. How old do you think he was? How old do you think he was? Okay, remember, let's do the math. I'll let you do the math. I'm not going to do the math. He got his commission as a lieutenant at the age of 16. How old do you think he was? All this experience. Okay, think about the 16-year-olds that are out there right now in our area. What 16-year-old today would you trust to be a lieutenant and go to war? I mean, we have a hell of a time with the 18-year-olds. Just in our general society. 16, he was a lieutenant in the army, went to war. A few years later, he raised his own cavalry, outfitted it, paid for it, and went to war. He went to the Constitutional Convention at 28 years old. 28 years old. He quickly became established as a vocal foe of big government. A vocal foe of big government at 28 years old. And he had the capacity to want big government in comparison to all of the other rich folks out there. Like his kinsman George Mason of Guston Hall, Virginia, he believed that weakness in the proposed U.S. Constitution did not adequately protect the rights of ordinary citizens from potential government tyranny. And he refused to sign it and fought its adoption. He published many of his anti-federalist views under the pseudonym A Maryland Farmer. And we're going to talk about a couple of these. As a Democratic Republican, a critic of George Washington's presidency, he joined a great political success. He enjoyed it. Mercer served a term as a U.S. congressman in 1792 to 94. He was a governor of Maryland, 1801 to 1803, and spent many years in the Maryland state legislature. Governor Mercer was long a trusted personal and political friend of Thomas Jefferson. But he did break ranks with the Democratic Republicans because of the Great Britain and the War of 1812. He opposed that war. He was in favor of just wars, and I'm not going to get into the War of 1812, but there was many things that happened that led up to the War of 1812 that we could have avoided. So in the last 5 minutes, let's take and kind of think about this. We have in 2008, we have a guy that is out there that has done exceptionally well in life. That guy spoke numerous times about what was going to happen with China, what was going to happen with this country if we did not take and look at what were the personal rights of we the people. Well, finally, he got pretty much fed up with it. And that guy took and he rode down an elevator in, what was that, 2015 and 16. And he fought. And he became president. Okay? And I am talking about Donald Trump, whom I consider a parallel in some respects. Not that he ever went to war. He did go to a military academy during high school, but a brilliant young man. Extremely brilliant. A good friend of mine went to real estate school with him and would tell me how brilliant he is. Other close friends of my close friend know Donald Trump well and always talk about how a brilliant individual he is and a patriot, that he loves this country. Well, we are going to take and get through here more on Mr. Mercer, on what it all means to take and be loyal, to the extent that you would give up a commission, to the extent that it would mean that you loved your country so much that you would raise your own army, cavalry in this particular case. You would be wounded, you would fight, you saw the loss of a brother, many other things, many others. So when we look at the Anti-Federalist papers and we look at it here in these last couple of minutes about Mr. Mercer, a Maryland farmer, as he wrote, these essays were all about taking and bringing into that perspective what the general government could do in destroying all of our individual rights. And yes, at that point, it did not cover the Bill of Rights, but if you had tyranny in the whole base of the system and into what would become all of the bureaucratic entities, the rights of the citizenry would be destroyed. We're seeing that. We're seeing that. We saw that under the Bush's administration, the Bush father-son nonsense. We saw that under Clinton. Worse was under the scab of on our country, Obama. And we're just seeing here that this was all predicted. I've told you that over and over and over again, that it would be predicted. Predicted that we would never have enough representation. And as we now in these United States, you know, when they were talking about 1 for every 30,000 citizens having a representative, now we have 1 for every 1.2 million people. That's not representation in a federal government. And then obviating the states, taking and overcoming the states with the federal powers. That's all talked about over and over and over again. So what are you going to do? What you're going to do is you're going to get out of your seats and get out there and start doing some things. You're going to make the phone calls. You're going to help everywhere you can. You're going to give that $5 to appropriate organizations that will fight directly for you. Hey, one of the ones I'm telling you right now for those in Ohio is Free Ohio Now. They need the money to fight. You got to look at what lawsuits are going to be out there and jump on those and support them. You need to go jump on those Trump trains that are happening right now. You need to go out and, you know what? Support your local businesses. You want to take and have civil disobedience because you're going to need to do that? different than BLM? Why don't you get about 100, 200, 300, 400 of your friends, take off your stupid muzzles and go into your local community and shop. Buy from the local store owners. You know what? Because that's what Sam Adams always said. Everything is local. Economy and politics. Come on back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists got it right. And all of my Screaming Eagle friends down there in Lima, Ohio, welcome back. I hope you go and listen to the second segment, which is included in the whole podcast. They're at, over my shoulder, SamuelAdamsReturns.net. I know those of you listening on the radio at Liberty Works Radio Network can't see that unless you go to YouTube to the Samuel Adams Returns channel and see my smiling face, or if you go to SamuelAdamsReturns.net, and you can then download or listen to the whole podcast right there of the program. And it also has the link, and it also has all the references for today's program there at SamuelAdamsReturns.net. So we are talking about this forgotten patriot, John Francis Mercer. And I want to just touch on a couple of his anti-federalist writings. There's quite a few there. The links to them are all there in the resources, both in the newsletter as well as, which is part of the posting for today's program. The important part is that when he walked away, he wasn't the only one, but when he walked away from the convention, he was just like, really? You got to be kidding me. You know, that just about everything inside of what was put together, nearly every feature, he was displeased with. It lacked a Bill of Rights. It was a tendency towards aristocracy, the lack of power and independence of the president, and a host of other features, which he brings out in all of these different papers. So there's a nice little essay learning concept here that I would like you, that is there on the archives. It's out of the University of Texas, and the discussion and objectives for learning about this is that the what's going on in defining the difference between democracy and a representative government. We're still, right now, that is a big question. That is a big battle. What does that mean? And then, what's those advantages of the different types of government? And obviously, we're talking about the critique of the Constitution based on the anti-federalist perspective. So let's jump over here. And one of the first papers that he wrote was 7 March 1788. It's called "The New Constitution Creates a National Government, Will Not Abate Foreign Influence, Dangers of Civil War and Despotism." I think the title says it enough right there. Look at where we are today. The foreign influence, even though you can go read George Washington's farewell address. And what does he say? Do not get involved in foreign entanglements. Really? The U.S. Constitution, the execution of the U.S. Constitution allows for that, especially when we start looking at treaties, and that a treaty becomes part of the law of the land. And I talk about treaties extensively in my book, From Covenant to the Present Constitution, and how entangled we are. Creating a national government, boy, oh boy. Yeah. Subsuming the states. When you have a yo-yo, a globalist, socialist, almost Marxist like Biden saying that everybody will wear a mask. When I become president, you're all going to wear masks. Really? You're going to tell us to do that? It's bad enough our stupid governors are telling us to muzzle up. And then you have all the media muzzling us. So he goes on to say here, and he's addressing Federalist number 3 with this. There are but two modes by which men are connected in society. The one which operates on individuals, this always has been and ought to still be called national government. The other, which binds states and government together, not corporations, for there is no considerable nation on earth, despotic, monarchical, or republic, that does not contain many subordinate corporations with various contributions and constitutions. This last has hereto been denominated a league or a confederacy. The term federalist, this is which I tell you all the time, the term federalist is therefore improperly applied to themselves by the friends and supporters of the proposed Constitution. This abuse of language does not help the cause. Every degree of imposition serves only to irritate, but can never convince. They are national men. They want a national government. And their opponents, or at least a real majority of them, are federal. So the Anti-federalists are the true federalists, in the only true and strict sense of the word. So then he goes on and is talking about what this national government will add to the dignity and increase the splendor of the United States abroad. Can admit of no doubt. It'll do that. National government will do that. It gives all of these different things. But the national government, as you'll read in there, it takes and it layers in on us. It just takes and it opens those doors for suppression. A couple of things that I wanted to highlight here, which I thought were extremely interesting, is that he says that that the national government, it will render government and the officers of government more dignified at home is equally certain. That these objects are more suited to the manners, if not the genius and disposition of our people is, I fear, so true. That it is requisite in order to keep us at peace among ourselves is doubtful. That it is necessary to prevent foreigners from dividing us or interfering in our government, I deny positively. And after all, I have strong doubts whether all its advantages are not more specious than solid. We are vain like other nations. He goes on to talk about wars and getting involved and different things like that. And then he does this other comparison, and he says this, that the content and pomp are incompatible. I have either read or heard this truth, which the Americans should never forget, that the silence of historians is the surest record of happiness of the people. So instead of being this global leader that we are, maybe we should be like the Swiss, he goes on to talk about, that has more of a quiet nature, but yet has that power and has the liberties that, geez, under the look at us Americans and all of that, you know, it is kind of like in wanting this great place in history, splendor and all of that. Well, anyway, enough said on that. You have to read it. It's kind of interesting. There's so much here that I obviously I'm not going to be able to get into. He talks about here on the preservation of parties and public liberty depends. What does that depend on? He was answering Federalist number 10 in that respect. He was talking about representation. He was talking about all the money that we owed. Then he goes into this whole thing is that America is at present divided into three classes or descriptions of men. And in a few years, there will be two. First, the first class comprehends all those men of fortune and reputation who stepped forward in the late revolution from opposition to the administration rather than the government of Great Britain. All those, get that. You got to pay attention to that. Look, they took in all these rich dudes, all these people of fortune and reputation, They came forward in an opposition of the administration of the government, not of Great Britain's government in and of itself. All those aristocrats whose pride disdains equal law. Hello? We have Wall Street and all these other millions and billionaires and all these other rich folks that are now Bidenites because they disdain liberty. He goes on to say that many men of very large fortune who entertain real or imaginary fears for the security of property. Those young men who have sacrificed their time and their talents to public service without any prospect of an adequate pecuniary or honorary reward. All your people of fashion and pleasure who are corrupted by the dissipation of French, English, and American armies and a love of European manners and luxury. Look, I don't have time to get into all of the rest of the description of this, but in other words, it's no different than it is today. You have all of the main folks flapping their jaws out there, and you know what? They just want theirs, and they don't care about our liberty. Your liberty's lost. Not that it's wrong for them to accumulate things. I'm not a socialist. Yeah, I believe in free market, fair market, more than a free market. Anyway, the second class of citizen is composed of those descriptions of men who are certainly more numerous with us than in any other part of the globe. First, those men who are so wise as to discover that their ancestors, and indeed all the rest of mankind, were and are fools. Get that? I would say sinners. He says fools. We have a vast proportion of these great men who, when you tell them that from the earliest period at which mankind devoted their attention to social happiness, it has been their uniform judgment that a government over governments cannot exist, that it is two governments operating on the same individual, assume the smiles of confidence, and tell you of two people traveling the same road, of a perfect and precise division of the duties of the individuals. And he goes into talking about a proverb that looks at this and said that no man can serve two masters. There you go. The third, at the head of the third class, appears the old rigid Republicans who, although few in number, are still formidable. Reverence will follow these men in spite of detraction as long as wisdom and virtue are esteemed among mankind. They are joined by true Democrats who are in general fanatics and enthusiasts and some few sensible, charming madmen. I mean, this is really interesting as he talks about this. You're going to have to read it. I'd have to teach and lecture it to you to get through all of this. But the bottom line is that now it's no different, but we only have a two-party system. But then we have the independents and not the libertarians, because the majority of them, as we've talked in the past, are kind of wacky. But one of the key elements that he brought out here is that we're fools in general. So that means we're sinners, because that's what the Bible tells us, is that fools are sinners, and we have a lot of that. And then the only way to keep good government functioning and operating is to have a virtuous and moral people. He talks about that, and he brings that together. And when he talks about this third class of people, and that how it's counted in the great mental powers and what it means to have that sublime virtue to keep America, that's what we have to have. We don't have that. So as I close, the things you need to do is that if you want to see the restoration of America, then what you need to do is see the restoration of the pulpits that will teach morality and virtue and take back our schools. If you don't, I mean, Biden already said goodbye to all the education. The communists and the teachers union said goodbye to all your education. So we're even going to have it worse for kids. So get your kids out of public schools, homeschool them, get them into a good educational process that would include homeschools, or get out there and take back the schools. Get out there and get elected to the school board. Other than that, do what I already said back in the second segment. Get involved, put your money where your mouth is, get your butt off your seats and your feet on the streets, and prepare watchfully for all that will be coming at you regardless of the outcome over these next month.